My little cousin would often talk about her friend who only she could see. One evening, when we got home from the grocery store, my uncle led my little cousin inside through the kitchen door like he always did, and set down the armful of bags he was carrying. My little cousin was standing next to him and suddenly said to her dad, "My friend said, don't go into the basement." We thought she was just using her overactive imagination again. When my uncle heard the basement door slam as someone hiding below took off out the back door, they must have broken into the basement, which led to an alley behind the house. They were gone by the time my uncle got downstairs. My cousin was too young to have any idea about intruders. I'm grateful nothing bad happened, but her warning served as proof that their house was haunted by something. My younger brother had an imaginary playmate named Sarah when we were kids. I could never see her, but I was 6 years older than my brother, too busy with high school to spend much time around the old family house. One day, my brother turned to me and said Sarah was sitting right beside me. Creeped out, but also curious, I finally asked him to describe her. In almost perfect detail, my brother described a girl with long red hair tied in a braid, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He said he wasn't allowed to play with her red doll. The chilling part was that we had never told him about our great-great-grandmother Sarah, who had worn her red hair in a long braid and who always carried her red doll as a child. She died almost 20 years before my brother was born. My boyfriend's sister, Mira, would wake up in the middle of the night crying that a shadow with red eyes stood by her bed, pinching her feet if they hung out from under the covers. She'd describe how it would pull her blankets and whisper at her in the middle of the night. We thought she was just having nightmares until the day I shared a room with her over the holidays. I woke up to the sound of the closet door opening, and my blankets were pulled halfway towards the dark closet. I got up to pick them up and heard Mira sit up behind me. "That's where he stays," she said, pointing to the closet. They moved her out of that room the next day. My son would draw creepy pictures of a tall man with no face, wearing a dark suit. He told us the man visited him at night and wanted to play hide and seek. He had dozens of these drawings, and every one of them was almost identical. We consulted a medium, a woman my coworker told me about. What she told us about the house was terrifying. The people that had lived there were into the occult, and she felt the energy of 3 separate spirits. One of them was very possessive and wanted to keep my son from the other 2. We stayed with my mom until we could find a new place to live. My friend Josephine has a daughter who is 4. Shortly after they moved into a new house, her daughter started singing songs we all thought were just silly sounds that she had made up. Until one day, my friend had the cable guy at her house, and her daughter started singing one of her songs. In a thick accent, he asked if they were Russian. My friend was confused and asked him why he thought that. He said the song her daughter was singing was a Russian lullaby he hadn't heard since he was a kid. Josephine's daughter laughed and said the lady in her room taught her the songs. We sing them together. They lived in that house for 3 years. but Josephine never saw anyone or anything. But her daughter continued to sing new songs in broken Russian, even after she moved her out of that bedroom and into hers. When my little sister Abby was very young, my family went on a week-long trip to a cabin in the woods owned by my dad's boss. It was rustic and fun, complete with rocking chairs on the front porch. But almost immediately, Abby started talking about her two new invisible friends, Lucy and Jack. She said they knew everything about the cabin and the woods, the best hiding places, the best places to go swimming. I figured she was just going through a phase until I woke up one night and heard her giggling and talking. My bedroom was to the front of the cabin, and I had the window open to let in the night breeze. But it took me just a minute to realize Abby was outside. Looking through the window into the dark, I could see my little sister laughing and talking on the porch of the cabin. I quickly went outside to get her back into bed before my parents freaked out. When I opened the front door, she was still talking, focused on the empty air of the two empty rocking chairs facing her. When my daughter was a little girl in the first grade, before tablets and iPads, she was given a chalkboard to use in school. It was the small, personal kind she could use at her desk for classwork and then bring home to use for homework. But somehow, it became an eerie focal point. She'd come home talking about messages that would appear while she was in class. She said most of the time they were just easy words like hi, or they would finish a word she was practicing writing. I told my daughter to bring the chalkboard home so I could show her there was nothing to be afraid about. After helping her with her homework, I tucked her into bed, collected her school bag, handouts, and the little chalkboard, and set them at the foot of her bed. But before I could turn away, I watched as a child's handwriting formed the words, "We're here now." After that night, strange things started happening at our house. I would hear kids talking quietly, have dreams about kids running through the house, and once I actually saw my bathroom door open and close with nobody nearby. It wasn't the wind or anything like that because the windows were closed. We were only in that house temporarily since I'm military, and I was transferred a few months later. From a young age, my niece had some sort of psychic ability. She'd predict things before they happened, mostly minor things, but with creepy accuracy. Usually it was something simple like, "Daddy's at the store," and then a few seconds later my uncle would call to ask if my aunt needed anything from the store because he'd stopped in on his way home. There wasn't any way she could have known he was going, but somehow she did. Another time, we were at dinner, and my aunt had given the waiter her credit card to swipe so we could leave after eating. My niece was coloring, and without looking up from her drawing, sang a little song about the waiter losing the card. A few minutes later, he came back to the table and told us he'd misplaced the card. The fact that my niece knew before it happened was so creepy. Last Halloween, when I was leaving to go home from their house after school, she grabbed my hand and told me not to leave. I asked her why, since I was excited to get my costume on and go trick-or-treating. She told me not to leave because something bad was going to happen on the road I walked to get home. Knowing that she had this ability, I decided to call my mom to pick me up. She took longer than normal to arrive, even though we were only a few blocks away. When I got in the car, she told me it was a good thing I hadn't left when I did. There'd been a drive-by on the street I would have taken. My daughter Lily started talking about her invisible friend Anne just after we moved into a new-to-us house. One day, Lily said, "Anne told me about the fire. She said she used to live there, but then there was a big fire and now she's with us." As far as we knew, our house had never experienced a fire, leaving us confused, and I shrugged it off, assuming she was just being creative. But tonight, I learned from our neighbor that the land where our house sits was part of a large farm until it was sold to a developer. The farmland had been sold off after the main house was destroyed in a fire. After we moved into a new apartment, my younger brother Timmy said, "The whispers in the closet won't let me sleep." He said he heard whispers coming from his closet at night, and they told him scary stories that made him cry. Our parents weren't believers in the paranormal, but they moved him out of his room and into mine. Cramped and not wanting to share a room when there was a perfectly good empty room just beyond the wall, I moved my bed into that room. On the very first night after I turned off the light, I heard whispering from the closet asking for Timmy. I was so freaked out when the whispers became growls. I ran out of there and haven't been back inside that room since. Our parents didn't believe us, but they didn't care if we shared our other room as long as we didn't fight over it. Before school the next day, Mom was moving her crafting supplies into that room, happy to have her own space for once. But when we came home from school that day, the door to that bedroom was closed, and we never did see her use that room for crafting. My dad put a lock on the outside of the door a few days later, and Mom told us to stay out of there. My friend Megan has a little brother named Danny who insists he has an invisible friend named Charlie. Danny would say things to Megan like, "Charlie is shy," or "Charlie doesn't feel like talking when you're around." It was weird, but as an only child, I didn't really know if that was normal or not. Megan would just roll her eyes and ignore Danny, or tell him Charlie wasn't real, and if he was, Charlie was a stupid name. One day, Danny insisted that we play hide and seek, but that Charlie wanted to be Megan's partner, and Danny would be mine. Danny pulled me behind the couch laughing and shushing me so loudly that I knew Megan would find us easily. But after a few minutes of not hearing any footsteps or anyone moving at all, we came out from behind the couch. As we climbed the stairs, I heard crying coming from their parents' bedroom. Danny suddenly looked very serious and said, "Charlie's mad. He's hiding too well this time." We found Megan locked inside the closet, crying. When we opened it, she came running out. She insisted Charlie had locked her inside with him. That was the last time Megan ever mentioned Charlie. My little sister Emma used to play with her imaginary friend, Lily. But one day she said, "Lily isn't here anymore. The boy scared her away." When we asked her about the boy, she wouldn't explain. We never found out what happened to Lily, because Emma never talked about Lily or the boy ever again. My young niece, Lucy, always spoke about her invisible friend, Peter. She would talk to him for hours, like he was as clear to her as any one of us. One day, when her mom was pulling down the Halloween decorations from the attic, Lucy told her, "Peter doesn't like the attic. He says it's too crowded." We rarely went into that attic, but after hearing that, none of us wanted to go up there again. When my cousin Alex was little, he went through a phase where he refused to go into his bedroom alone. One of us had to go with him. He'd say, "The man is there," and point to the corner of his room. Of course, we saw nothing, but he looked so sure of himself, and he was so scared. It was hard to not feel creeped out in that room. Outside of that room, he was a regular, happy kid. They let him share a room with my other cousin until they moved out of that house a couple of years later. He hasn't been afraid of being alone since. My little cousin Sam insisted that he had an imaginary friend named Max. He described Max as having short, dark hair. But one day he said, "Max doesn't like the man in the hat. We're not supposed to talk about him." When I asked him what he saw, Sam drew a boy with dark hair, and beside him he drew the man with a hat who'd silently follow him. We never knew who Max or the man in the hat were. My cousin is 26 now, and still won't talk about the man in the hat.